Welcome to everybody here in Keele Hall. Thank you very much for joining us for this evening's Global Challenge Lecture, which is under the banner of the Institute of Liberal Arts and Sciences, ILAS. So briefly, for those who may not be familiar with ILAS, ILAS promotes interdisciplinary education and research both at Keele and also beyond. So we have a range of very interesting speakers who come and deliver and have conversation really on the back of that concept of interdisciplinarity. So more information is available, of course, on the ILAS website, and you can also listen back to some of the previous lectures which have been recorded. So tonight's lecture, I have the great pleasure of introducing Antonius, is going to be presented by Professor Antonius Raghubansie and is entitled Heading South, Patterns in International Student Mobility. So I'll just give you a few words of introduction about Antonius, not to spare his blushes. So Professor Raghubansie joined us at Keele in late spring, I think 2023, as Pro-Vice-Chancellor International. So previously, Antonius was at the University of Westminster, where he was head of the School of Management and Marketing. And immediately before that, he held directorate responsibility in international education in multiple countries in South and East Asia. So Antonius has a background in industry and academia, in marketing and international management, and his research explores the impact of digital technology on creative organisations. And this is an area he has continued to work on with leading global partners. He's held various leadership roles in the beverages industry and in UK higher education at school, cross-institutional and cross-sector levels in relation to education, student experience and sustainability, among others. So Antonius this evening is going to present for approximately 40 minutes and will then lead a question and answer to which you are all very, very warmly invited to contribute. And that does include, of course, colleagues who are online who will be able to join in the conversation, and we will try to cover as many questions and responses as we can within the time. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to Antonius and look forward to his lecture this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for being here, and thank you to those who've joined online as well. First of all, thanks to ILAS. I really appreciate this. And the students, I suspect some of them are here. I look forward to the questions that will be there afterwards. But maybe I'll move on quickly. So a few key things here. I did actually spend time looking up going south because I thought, what does that mean? And the first thing that came up was Vers le Sud, and I realized it's a French film, but I won't tell you what that's about. You might have to look it up yourself. But I also found an American song, Going South, which I'll come back to at the end. But really, it's very much pun intended, really, for this particular talk. So we know that we are having some challenges in international recruitment at the moment, and we know that education systems are changing around the world. So the main question we're looking at this evening is what's happening with what we call the Big Four. Is the kind of heyday, we know the heyday is probably over. The heyday of students just coming to the Big Four, is that over now? But is it permanently over? I think that's the real question we need to ask ourselves. And there are a few questions we will explore this evening. So we know in the UK now that international students, they don't just subsidize research, they now subsidize home student fees as well. Is that okay for these big countries as well? And of course, can these countries afford it? Parents are particularly concerned, especially in China, about their children's safety. So you see a change in Chinese parents' decision-making about where they send their kids. And there is a political question And the political question is about geopolitics and so on. We can see what's happening in the US right now. But I left that little bit at the bottom there because I think it's a helpful theoretical frame for this evening's discussion. I won't go too much into it, but I want you to know that it's there. We refer to it a little bit more towards the end. But critical internationalization studies has tried to look at internationalization beyond the norm, beyond the expectation, beyond an imperative, and what else it carries with it. So, why should students make such an investment? It's been, I think, when you look at what's happening with technology, maybe they don't need to do all of this anymore. Maybe they absolutely don't need to come. And then we have increasingly governments conflating immigration and students and all of that, and all the politics and the mess that goes with that. There is also increasing advocacy for international education. In some parts of the world, that's going up, and some parts of the world, that's actually going down. And it's not just about university, it's about all kinds of other things. So you have other skills that last year was the European Year of Skills, 2023, year before the last. And also there are questions about well-being and health post-COVID. And the other big thing which is happening, which is what I'm going to be spending time on, is this last bit here. What's happening with education systems around the world. So we know that all of these are pretty strong systems. Egypt is a very strong education system as a hub. Malaysia, we'll talk a fair bit about this evening. Dubai, Sri Lanka, Kazakhstan as well. And India has ambitions to be one of those hubs as well. I think we could very easily, do I miss something? So what's the conclusion? There's all of that stuff, and then there's all of this stuff. All the costs are going up. Canada, you know, has put a cap because of that massive impact on housing in the country. And well, we all see what's happening in the US now. It's almost, well, it's a bit of chaos over there right now. So, if we look at the total picture, we've got, from Navitas actually, I got the latest report that I could have got on all 4 countries. And this is the pattern of visas in the Big 4 over the course of the last 5 years. And if you look at the UK, you can see we had the best recovery out of COVID. We came back out of COVID much, much faster than everybody else. But then, of course, we have been having corrections since then. And then Canada, this number is going to go down further. And Australia, well, probably further as well. And the US, we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So the UK would have had a correction, without a shadow of doubt. We were due for a correction. But maybe the UK will see some benefit from what's happening in the other countries over the course of the next year. When I speak about the Big 4, I'm not talking about Germany and France and so on, because they're also very big systems. But last year, we had 1.46 million students chose to go and study somewhere overseas in these big countries. And this year, that figure is down 1.2 million. So overall, the whole pie is actually getting smaller. So that's the big picture there. But China is the one we need to be thinking about. This just came out a couple of weeks ago. Sorry, go back there. So you can see what's happening with youth unemployment. Chinese government stopped reporting on youth unemployment. And as a result of this drive, it's changing what Chinese parents are doing and what Chinese students are doing. And as you can see, they're looking for places where they think they might be able to get a job. And so previously, they wouldn't necessarily spend so much time thinking about this. They would just choose a good university, and they will go there. Now, they want to make sure that you can get a job for them. So understanding what's happening, I think, in East Asia is going to help us to answer that question about whether this Big 4 heyday is over. And so we look at mobility to the west and what's happening in the east. Southeast Asia is the case study for this evening. But for anybody here, please don't be offended. This could easily be a talk about any of these. It's just Southeast Asia is an interesting example to illustrate the case. aside from the fact that the food is absolutely amazing and I love to go there. I think about it all the time. I miss it a lot, actually. So there'll be food references throughout this evening, unfortunately. So this is really, it tells you what's happening with Southeast Asia, that's what C is. What's happening with mobility, as in students traveling out of those regions to study. And as you can see, before COVID, it was a pretty steady, it was going in the right direction. But it's really a tale of two halves. You've got the more mature countries like Malaysia and Singapore, we are actually seeing a slowing. And then you have the sort of younger, newer countries like Vietnam actually increasing, and Indonesia also increasing. Indonesia is beginning to pick up again, and emerging much, much faster. But this is the last sort of last few years. It's probably better to look at a longer period, a 10-year period, and it gives you a sense of where we are. Actually, it's largely stayed the same. But what we're seeing in East Asia is, well, progressively, this number has pretty much remained relatively flat. The UK has still maintained its market share, as in is about 25% of the market. But really and truly, those slight shifts is just about government policy. And you see a little bounce and you see a little straight, but by and large, that picture is flat. East Asia probably doesn't really need to be going anywhere else. And that curve could very quickly go right down. That's the point at which they're at the moment. So when we think about that, we think, well, what does that mean for the UK, but also what does it mean for Kiel? Sorry, more bad news. This is Russell Group, what's happening with Russell Group. We're seeing progressively, this one particularly on the right-hand side, you're seeing that students are increasingly choosing the Russell Group. Over the course of a decade, the Russell Groups are actually getting stronger and stronger all the way through. There are a couple of exceptions, but by and large, it keeps growing. So where does that leave Kiel? Are we condemned to operate in the price-sensitive markets? Is that the challenge that's facing us? What about the wider UK? So, if I could just maybe summarize this little piece so far. And you think, I said food, students are having to choose between fish and chips. That's not just fish and chips, though, that's Rick Stein's fish and chips, so it's good fish and chips. Versus, the street food, beef rendang on the streets of Malaysia or Singapore. So they're still coming in large numbers, is what I think we can see. They're becoming more selective. We're seeing that it's slowing in the older markets, and it's actually speeding up in the new ones. And then that then begs us, well, okay, fine, that's beginning to happen. What exactly is keeping them at home, aside from the idea that the education systems are getting better? Besides the food, of course. We know this piece has been TNE, transnational engagement, transnational education has been strong in Southeast Asia for a long time. It's still a large sending region, but the trend is heading down. So we have a look at what's happening with TNE. Now, Malaysia was one of the first countries, just like China, that became a very big hub for education. However, TNE registrations for UK universities has actually been trending down for quite some time, until after COVID. And it's begun to trend down again, this year's data. So we haven't quite got that. So it went back up for a little while, but it's beginning to go down again. And I mentioned Vietnam and earlier, Vietnam and Indonesia. So they have high quality education from UK universities right at their doorsteps. They also have high quality universities at home, right at their doorsteps. So again, they need to have a really big push to come overseas. Hence being selective and going more to the Russell Group universities, having a really strong proposition to get them to come out. So we look a little bit at Malaysia. I think Malaysia helps us to answer the question of whether the West is needed in particularly. I wanted to draw your attention to this one because I think this one's particularly interesting. This is data which just came out, literally just came out. South Korea, absolutely going in the right direction. Bigger than Malaysia, actually. We'll see that just now. Singapore, Hong Kong. China has had a dip, but China is pretty keen to turn that around. And they're obviously tying that to the Belt and Road Initiative. But I think we'll have to watch China. But if you look at Malaysia, it's basically grown 100% over the course of that 5-year period. And it's pretty much kept that growing. Compound annual growth rate of about 30% year on year. So Malaysia is the big question for us. And China, no surprises. China is also, the West is gaining substantially from China, but so is Malaysia. The largest volume of students are going to Malaysia. I think we can safely say that Malaysia has pretty much set itself up as a competing system to the UK now, without a shadow of a doubt. So we've come from a funny situation where we now had to choose between fish and chips and beef rendang. We're now basically saying, well, yeah, it's Chinese versus Chinese. That's where we've got to. So why are those students choosing to go home? So we found out, the Vice Chancellor and I were in Malaysia last year, and we found out that the largest volume of those international students are actually going to study at our partner university, University Sains Malaysia. There were 6,000 to 7,000 Chinese students studying in that campus because they feel culturally more comfortable. That question about welcoming and feeling safe and what parents are saying to their children. So the sector is strong and attractive. TNEs at home. The wider East Asia picture is consistently building up. And that first question I asked at the beginning, why come? It's value for money. So when you go to KL, you will see students are coming into the campus with massive shopping bags because they just came back from the malls and they buy a lot of stuff and the money goes a long way in that. So they can have an amazing lifestyle as well as good quality education. So again, why would they leave South Asia and come to the Big Four? We've seen the preference for the premier universities in the West, and maybe it's research that's keeping them there. This is from our own Kiel signed a letter of collaboration with University of Technology Malaysia, which is the leading technology university in Malaysia. But this is just to give you a sense of the whole picture and what's happening in the world now. I think sometimes we need to be reminded that China has grown massively in the last decade. Its contribution to global science is huge. In STEM alone, they produce 5 times the number of PhD students than the US now. And the UK, although we are 3.2%, we still have a very, very strong system, as in we get double the citations of what the percentage we produce, 3.2, but actually of global citations around the world, 6% come from the UK. So, are we taking up the opportunity with China, the UK? We could do a lot more. Kiel could do a lot more. I think that's one of the questions we need to think about. So, if you go back to Malaysia, that's the sort of big picture there. You look at Malaysia and you think, actually, only 49% of their research is with international collaborators. So there is room to grow. And that's an opportunity for us. It means that we could probably still get into that system. We are not out of time. We haven't come in too late. And maybe there is a bit of hope when you look at that. And there is one other piece, actually, that helps us to tell that story even more so. If you look at what's happening here, you can see we still have lots of space. Collaboration with the UK in Malaysia is still very small. So potentially we could substantially grow our presence in that space when we think about that. There's a whole set of stuff there about impact, but we wouldn't look at that. But what's happening within the wider East Asia system? Forgive this slide, please. Don't try to pay too much attention. But what it shows you is at the top. So the previous slide showed you we've got opportunities to collaborate with Malaysia, for example, or the wider East Asia system. But within the system, they are beginning to become quite self-sufficient. So if you look at the top here, we've got China. So this is all of East Asia here. We've got China, and then the top 10 collaborators are there on the other side, this side here. So China's got US, Germany, UK, Australia, Japan, Singapore, South Korea there. But if you look at Japan, and then you look at Singapore, Singapore's now, China is the #1 collaborator for Singapore. That's a relatively new development. And if you look here again, Taiwan, Vietnam, within the region, they're all beginning to support each other, actually, for growth, for globalization, for the quality of the research, the kind of output that they want to develop. And then if you come down here and you look at the UK, we currently collaborate with China. In our top 10, China is the only country there in that set. So we still have a lot of space, actually. We still have a lot of room to grow. But we need to do more with China, and we need to do more with all of these. And that still gives us an opportunity. It gives Kiel an opportunity, but it gives the UK wider system an opportunity. There is an interesting bit for us to think about as well. So 5% of the world's population speaks English, 5%, and 2/3 of Ulrich's directory says that all the journals in the world are in English. And Web of Science and Scopus, it's 80%. So imagine when these systems begin to actually develop they're already doing that, we can see that. They begin to develop their homegrown publishing systems. 12% of the world's population speaks Chinese. So if they built that up and they started to build their own domestic, which is what the Chinese government's currently pushing on, then how do we respond to that? So there is a gap, there is a window, but we need to engage with that before that window closes. We are engaging, so Kiel's got CMAC is with University of Sains Malaysia, our partner. It's a center for research where we do heparin research. Heparin is, I don't quite understand all of it, but heparin is a drug. It's an anti-clotting drug. It's used by 80% of the world. It's really important. Kiel's doing a project with USM in that space. And we have 14 students going out this summer again. But sometimes I'm not sure if the students are going for the right reason. Maybe Scott knows. Because they have their own personal private beach and private island. That's where the research takes place. They spend a lovely time out there. So there is scope. There is room for us. And we're not too late to that party. I mentioned this already, but this is just an example in medicine where one of our own, I suspect people in this room, were part of that. 90% of the papers published by the West in the top medical journals, they're all only from this part of the world. And 20 years later, it had only improved by 7%. So we haven't necessarily shifted, or we are not necessarily collaborating. We are still very much this way, and we have to think about that. So what? I think I'll keep with my food thing. My food examples. It's not going to be toad in the hole, as it were. I don't think that's a preference right now. It's more laksa, if you've had laksa, and ramen noodles. But it's also about being willing to go out there and try out spicy food and experiment with stuff. So being in the right place at the right time. There's somebody in the room there. That's the Minister of Higher Education. That's the Director of International for University Technology Malaysia. And that's Raphael, who is in the room this evening, who is the Director of our Digital Society Institute. And that in itself gives you an interesting example of what we need to do. Because these people are absolutely disrupting, and they're pushing the boundaries. They're working with NVIDIA, And this was the launch of the Faculty of Artificial Intelligence, which was the first faculty of its kind in Malaysia. And Kiel is a member of the AI consortium in Malaysia. So, in summary, or just before, I just have a couple more slides before I conclude. A few things. Students are still coming to the West, but probably with being more selective. They have to be convinced, they have to be certain. And those who are coming from this region, they're coming if they're certain they will be able to get employability skills and get a job. That's increasingly becoming evident, which wasn't so strong before. All of that, HE at their doorsteps. Research systems are growing up, and China looms over that entire region. And we are not necessarily engaged with China, we as in Kiel, but also the UK. So what are we left with? I think this is hope. I've given you some gloom, I've given you a glimmer of hope, and I've given you a bit more gloom. But this is probably a little bit of a silver lining at the expense of others. You might not be able to see that so well, but this is Trump 1.0. There was a minus 28% reduction in students going to the US when Trump first became president. Are we going to see that again? I don't know. And then similarly, post-Trump, they never went back from the Middle East and North Africa. Even after Trump, they never went back. This is up to 2024 data, by the way. They never went back. And then we saw some increase in North America, and East Asia also never went back. They never went back. So within their system, they can afford to stay there. The ones that did go back was South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And that's probably driven by what we see in the UK as well. Employability, transforming their lives, looking to build something new and something different. So, if we see the same curve again in Trump 2.0, we will benefit from that. We don't know if that curve will look exactly the same way, but we will see. If you haven't come across it yet, but if you look up Vice President Vance, in 2021, he did a speech to the National Conservatism Conference, if I can speak. You can look up what he said about universities in that particular speech. I don't think I can repeat it. So, Trump 2.0. Longer term, I think this is the Vice-Chancellor. If you look at these people here, you will see this is the Chair of the Education Commission of Malaysia. That's the Minister of Higher Education. That's the Director General of Higher Education. And that's, of course, Trevor, our Vice-Chancellor. We sometimes just need to be in the right place at the right time. That's what that was about. And I think Trevor was the only Vice-Chancellor from the UK in that room while that particular event was happening. So sometimes we need to make sure we're getting out there. So longer term, we need to be thinking about how we engage and being more active. But there is still hope. I'm quite an optimistic kind of person. There was only 1 million students traveling overseas in the 1970s. And then that ballooned to more than 5 million. Pre-COVID, 192 billion pounds of money circulating around the world. And that pretty much recovered very quickly post-COVID. HE has survived multiple crises regularly. There was always a crisis, but somehow it still managed to survive. And today there are really tricky government immigration policies we're seeing in all the big countries. But again, the HE sector, if you take the long view, it always tends to overcome those. And although you might see sort of changes in the shifts and the patterns, so we saw Holland, for example, and Ireland had a massive increase in students going to those countries post-Brexit. And they've continued to see that actually, but it's beginning to slow. And there are still millions of students all over the world planning to go and study somewhere else. They're looking for something else. What is that something else we're going to give them? And default may not be so much as it used to be for hundreds of years to the West. It might be to other systems. And if you just took Egypt as an example, in 1950, the average age of education for people over 25 was half a year. And by the 2020s, that had gone to 8 years. That's the amount of education people were having. So huge change. And that's not just Egypt, that's replicated in many, many places of the world. And if we look at transnational education, UK exports of students, you can see that these numbers are still increasing. That was last year. This is the latest statistics we have. It keeps going up. Malaysia is not going up. Malaysia is going down for the reasons we just talked about. But Sri Lanka is going up. Singapore is going up. Egypt's going up. Greece is going up. There's a whole set of opportunities still. And we haven't even touched on what's happening in India, what's happening in Pakistan, opportunities in Nepal. So there is still a lot of scope for us to engage. But I don't think we can engage in the same way. ET&E is equitable T&E. That's what it's called. It's a concept which is being rolled out. And it's about being more mutual, being less extractive, finding a common good for both sides when two universities are working together. So still, there is that bit of hope there. I'll let you read that for a bit. If you're not familiar with Professor Kupchan, he used to be an advisor to Barack Obama. He's a professor of international government affairs. So we are seeing this. It's a bizarre kind of scenario where people want to be more local as well as more global at the same time, and there are real tensions and challenges across the world. But more uncertainty means we should be engaging more, not less, actually. We need to be engaging more. And this was the Vice-Chancellor meeting the Prime Minister of Malaysia when we were there early. Trevor didn't know we were doing all these pictures of him. And I didn't know he was coming this evening, so it was not deliberate. So, in closing, I think some of this stuff is relatively clear. And nothing I've said this evening, when I look at it in aggregate, you think, well, yes, there are no surprises there. What I've tried to do is update that and say to you, this is where the reality currently stands. But some of the windows are probably closing in terms of where we can go in and how we can operate. But what is very clear is our model of engagement has to change. We are at that point. We used to talk about it, but we are at that point where we have to change the model of engagement. And it needs to be a model that's more co-created, a model that's more respectful, and a model that's more mutual. And there aren't many universities that have that in their DNA like Kiel does. Kiel does have that, which is one of the reasons why I think when you talk about equitable T&E, for example, we are a university that can do that because it's in our blood. It's what we do. It's how we were founded. So I started with these questions. I think all those questions still remain. And if you look at it from Stein and McCartney, who talk about critical internationalization studies, they say that if we think about what we've done in the last 30 years, we've basically grown a global science system. That's what we've done through internationalization. And if you leave that, then not much to do, just keep going. And then education is a public good. Again, minor changes. But there are two other perspectives. One is whether we can focus on global equity. I deliberately say hairy dragons because that's what we used to say about whales. I don't know if we're allowed to say that anymore. But it is a serious one. We need to think very, that will create major challenges. But I think we are there. That's exactly where we currently are. And the second one is, well, it's beyond us. Let's just destroy everything. And then I don't know what happens. And we are seeing a little bit of that in the US at the moment. But I think I said, here be the devil with that one. I don't know how far we get, but we definitely are here. What's happening is we've built up most of our systems here, and we have to find a way to make that transition to that next step. I did say that song from that American song I came across that was called Going South. It says, don't stop going south. Don't stop going south. I'm not going to try to sing for you. Because they let you play your music real damn loud. And maybe that's just a food, but I think that's the story there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Antonius. It's given us loads of thoughts and ideas for us to share in some debate now. I think we've got some roaming mics. Thank you, the student ambassadors, who might be able to, if you indicate that you have a question that you would like to ask, please do so. And we'll also have some questions from those colleagues who are online. Straight away, thank you. Do you want to start?
You have it?
Thanks, Chris. Go for it, Raphael.
Do you want to say a bit more about India?
So
We haven't talked so much about India. I would like to hear more about it. Any comment on India?
All right. So I think colleagues in this room know, some of them know, that India promises a lot. And having lived in India and worked in India for a number of years, you need to take that promise a little bit carefully, is my view. I think we are all extremely happy in the sector that, well, we have another university which is taking the plunge, and we will learn from that. I think all of us will learn from that, and we're waiting to see how it goes. But we can't ignore India, and we can't disengage from India. If there's one country we need to be in, we absolutely need to be in there as quickly as we can. But it wouldn't necessarily be as simple as we have with a well-developed system like Malaysia, or Sri Lanka, for example, which has almost exactly the same education control and education management or quality assurance system as we have in the UK. It's not the same. India is basically Europe on steroids. Each state has its own regulation, each state has its own university system, each state has its own economy, it has its own specialism and its capabilities. You could probably just do one state for the next 10 years and build up a large, sustainable, successful collaboration. But my view is very much you be careful, you be cautious, but you must go in every way you possibly can. And increasingly, if you've been following recently, there was a delegation, one of the largest delegations just went from the UK HE sector went to India, and they all came back with the same message. You have to go in with a proposition that will value and benefit them, that they want value from. The days of saying, come here, those days are probably over.
I can quote you, if I may. One of the things you mentioned towards the end was the question of employment after one degree. Have we got here at Keele the right attitude at the moment in terms of employability? If I may, I just read this piece that I looked at earlier. It says the increasing competitiveness, globalisation and internationalisation of the job market have resulted in unique demands from employers in terms of skills and competence expected from graduates. If I put that in direct confrontation with what we're talking about here, the Institute for Liberal Arts and Science, are we too? Is Keele going to be too liberal? Do we need to tighten that up?
Mm-hmm. I think we tightened it up a long time ago, but maybe Vice Chancellor's here, he can comment on that. But the question of employability, I think the university recognises that generally anyway. So Chris is chairing this evening's session and has led on a huge piece of work across the university to embed employability into everything that we do. And that, when I say everything we do, as in jobs for students, into the curriculum, into real-world experiences, real problems, challenging issues, without going away from our core. So even here this evening, I'm sure there are students who are from the Global Challenges pathway, which looks to bring things together. So students have a variety of capabilities or graduate attributes when they leave us. But that's generally for all students. Can we say we are doing that for for international students? We probably can't, because you just take the Chinese system. That takes a lot of understanding to be able to say we are going to prepare you to go back home and work. And similarly, with India, for example, which is the next biggest country, we need to step up the way we currently engage with those systems. So we know how students get a job here in the UK. We know how the NHS works. We know how various services work, but we don't necessarily know that for those students back there. And that means we're going to have to work closer with national bodies like the British Council, UUK, those that will give us insight, but also employer bodies in those major countries. And we also need to work with our teams. There's some of them here who absolutely know what jobs those students are going to go back to when they go back home. But also alumni, we need to do a lot more work with our alumni. Some universities are very, very good at doing that. So Birmingham University, for example, not far up the road from us, are very, very good at doing that in India. But they've had an India center for many, many years, more than a decade. So they have built up academic capabilities, pedagogic capabilities, course design and all of that, as well as a network of links in the country.
Hi there, thank you for your presentation. I was curious as well whether the statistics balanced for the domestic intake. I think you may have mentioned it on one of the slides, but I didn't read it quick enough. I was wondering if you would be able to talk a little bit about the student intake as a result of obviously global economic conditions and the intake that they have domestically. Are they seeing a similar challenge in enticing students in general, or is this something that is only on the international education front?
No, it's happening across the piece. So the US has seen a drop in enrollments for home students, I think progressively for 4 or 5 years now. The statistic which jumped out at me a couple of weeks ago was one US college closed every month over the last 3 years in the US. And there is a Harvard paper, which I was looking at a couple of weeks ago, which said that could get up to 30% of US colleges failing. And that's not because of overseas, that's because of domestic consumption. And of course, in the UK, we've had, I think, more than a decade of pressure against, effectively a campaign against going to university. And we have to fight that back. We still have room to grow. The number of young people who can go to university is actually increasing. But less students are coming to university. We're already seeing, I think it's 5%, Mark, something like that. Mark is the one who knows all the stats and home.
The same number of going, it's a small proportion.
Small proportion, yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really good to have that very global view of what the international market looks like for Southeast Asia, and really good for Kiel to see that. I think it comes a bit something a bit new in the way we work at Kiel, so it's really, really interesting. Just going back to the employability question, if that's indeed the hook for international students to come here, because they're trying to get skills and knowledge to bring back to their own country, we need to have that. And if we don't quite yet have that for international students, we should consider how we want to develop that. So I was wondering, and maybe we do that, and my question is naive, but do we go to those countries bringing a kind of workshop where we deliver our teaching already in place, some kind of Kiel on the road that we could put together in a nice way, obviously with some work, but that'd be brilliant for the ENS contracts, for instance, for the scholarship contracts, where they would say employability in China could look like that, for instance, and bring something around AI, for instance, been mentioned for Malaysia, and just have a very quick kind of educational bite to deliver for very little money to those countries, to have them just be interested in coming to Kiel. Is that something that would be of interest?
So probably 4 or 5 years ago, we probably can't afford it in the sector anymore. Flying faculty is really expensive, or even academic time is expensive. On the other hand, we have models at Kiel. We have a partnership with, Aneta is here, we have a partnership in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in the business school with a university called Sander. And they deliver a Kiel course from the business school there. And then academics go there twice, thrice a year to engage with those students. And then those students study 2 years there, and then they can come to Kiel to study afterwards. And that, we've had our first intake from that. We've had about 30 students, 30, just in year one, and that number will go up by 50% every year. That kind of model is the model that we need to look at, because it's more consistent, it's more long-term, and we begin to build that capability up. What you describe will happen and does happen, and it does happen in that mix as well, face-to-face as well as online. So Russell Clark, for example, from the Language Centre, will get on a Teams call and talk to all the students about how to get through their language tests, academic skills feedback, what's the right thing to do. We have Adam is in the room as well. We have colleagues who are in China, and they will go and talk to those students in that university, in that college, before they come, talk to them about what to expect, prepare them. So there is a way, there is a model, and there is a way for us to actually do that. What we don't have is enough of those. So I've said, when I was in China in November, I've said, we need 3 more of those, for example, in this next 12 months. But actually, we need that across multiple disciplines, not necessarily only in China, but in different countries. And that is also more equal and more mutual and more respectful, because you are there, you talk to the parents, you talk to the students, you talk to the academics, and you understand what they need, and you support that need.
Based on that, especially with the challenge of the cost of international travel, what value do you see in the use of virtual exchanges, especially when supporting teaching that's being done elsewhere? I ask that with a risky thing, because of course my sort of background here is in delivering those kind of virtual exchanges to international partners. But do you see that that is a cost-effective way of supporting these kinds of projects, both in a synchronous and asynchronous delivery method?
Yeah. Thanks. A really interesting question. We actually do have examples of that. I don't know what's your background, but in medicine and health sciences, we have, I think it's the physicians. Do I use that word? That phrase? Physicians associate. We have students who study in the same classroom in Kiel and in the US, and I think Brazil also.
That would be mine.
That'll be yours. Okay, there you go.
Andrew Morris.
Andrew, okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Met face to face.
Yes, sorry.
Virtually, which is ironic considering the question.
So this is Andrew's story. So it's a fantastic story. It's exactly the one. I think I said to a couple of colleagues, we need one of those in each faculty, because then by osmosis you begin to build that practice across the university.
More recognisable face for it.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, you do. Yeah, maybe. I should have put some recipes up.
So in terms of research, I guess to do global health research, we have got a Global Health Institute, and building relationships through collaborating together to do research also stimulates the trust in the institutions and the exchange of ideas, knowledge and students as well. But it's tough to get the funding to do the research for global health. And particularly there are areas where through the equity and through the giving back, the actual return on investment in many instances to the UK is small. The larger proportion of that funding goes elsewhere. But if I'm understanding your pitch, that there is a value to the university to commit to that sort of return on investment, even if in real terms it doesn't bring the research funding to Kiel, because of the additional benefit of creating relationships and creating those opportunities for students to feel that they want to come to Kiel to learn more and to take things. And it's the Institute for Global Health, but obviously that is quite wide-ranging, and it would take across a whole range of disciplines in that.
Yeah, so again, in normal circumstances, maybe a few years ago I would have said yes, but I don't think we can say yes anymore because we don't have the money, to be honest. But it's about how you construct it and how you build it together as a whole. So, for example, let's take Sri Lanka as an example. Kiel's been doing research in Sri Lanka for 15 years, a decade, more than that. And I mean deep, systemic, life-changing research. And yes, the money doesn't necessarily come to Kiel. Most of that money, it's delivered out there. We don't see the benefit of it in that way. But if you were to take the list of universities which are in Sri Lanka is the second largest T&E market in the world for the UK, second largest. And you took those universities which are there, none of them is doing any research of any substance compared to what Kiel has done in the last decade. So what do we need to do? We need to leverage that. Because if we did, we will find the right partners. Students will know about us rather than our competitors down the road. So students will meet their neighbors on the streets or wherever at weddings and functions and say, oh yes, I studied X UK university course. I never went to the UK, but I studied that course here in Sri Lanka. It is a good university. They wouldn't know that about Kiel. So we have to change that. It's about making the connections. And similarly with the funding, I remember my son was at school with this, I think he was 5, and he came home and he said, oh, there's this new student. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll say hi. And I said hi to his mom in the evening. She was a chairman of the World Bank for South Asia. And I always think, it's good. So when you're out there, you kind of have to make the contacts as well, and then you begin to make it financially viable. You begin to find where the funding pots are. But if you're not there and you're not necessarily having a wider strategy, it's difficult for you to turn it around.
Thanks, Antonius. I think two different questions, really. One, a lot of this can be dictated by the attitude of the governments on the other side of the equation, if you like.
Yeah.
So, what is the advantage for students to come to the UK? Mm-hmm. If you're in China, then actually those students that are probably going to ultimately do well now will be those that go to the posh universities in China. Whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, the Chinese were doing everything they could to recruit Chinese students back into China that had had the experience in the UK. And I guess India ultimately will go through that cycle as well. So I think there's something there. So it'll be interesting about your perspectives on what the attitude to students who have been to the UK is when they go home. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, because that would be one of the drivers. The other, I guess, is a slightly different slant, which certainly one of the things on that trip that we made last year to Malaysia is, again, trying to make sure we don't continue to take that colonial view of we are going there to do them a favour. Yeah. But actually, what are they doing that we need? And that can help us. And as you showed, the increase in research performance in some of the other countries, then actually we've got to be honest with ourselves and say they've got stuff that we don't. Yeah. So we're not going over there to give, we're going over there to potentially take. And that attitude can really change the perspective that we have. And maybe some opportunities, again, as we discussed, to have joint PhD studentships in Malaysia, where actually the students are only having to pay £1,000 a year versus the 15,000, whatever we would charge over here. In terms of our research capacity and volume, then that can be a huge step forward. It doesn't do very much for the finances. Yeah. But in terms of actually the reality of how much research we're doing and the quality of the research that we're doing, then actually shifting our mindset could be really important.
Okay. So the second one is easier, because I think the answers to all of that's yes. Again, Raphael's in the room, and I remember when we went to visit this laboratory, he was so excited about visiting this laboratory because the kit that they've got there, the amount it will cost us to put that kit in. And if we build that relationship, we could have access to that as well. And then, additionally, they have one of the largest spin-out systems in Malaysia. So potentially, if we are on it and we invent something, we'll make some money too. And we are not necessarily good at that. Well, I don't think we're necessarily good. We're actually as good as anybody else in the UK. But there is an opportunity out there that's sitting there. So you're right on that second one. And likewise with doctoral students. I think this goes back to the India question. So when you look at in India, what typically happens is you will have people have supervised this bunch of students. They've gone back, they become department heads, or they're running a center, they're running a laboratory. And then when you have a post, they will apply to come to that post. It creates a kind of a virtuous circle. You begin to build that kind of network. So yes, there is other payback. There is other payback in that one. So I think that one's easy. The attitudes to students, there is a study actually going on right now of students who are in TNE, students are in the premier Chinese universities, and students are going back from overseas to China. And it's interesting because the employers think that the Chinese students who are in the premier Chinese universities there are better than any of the students who are in a TNE or a joint campus in China, and also better than those coming back. And it's interesting why they're saying that. They're saying that because they think, they perceive that those students are more difficult to control. They're more difficult to supervise. They're harder to give directions to, and it's harder to get them to work late hours if I want them to work late hours. So I don't know where that study is going to go. It's actually live right now. It started, they've already collected their first set of data. We'll see what happens in phase 2 of that study. But it's fascinating. On the other hand, there are some sectors which prefer to employ those students. So retail, IT, and global logistics. And when you think about that, yeah, that makes sense. They prefer to hire those students, and they will hire them into very senior posts. And so in a way, what's emerging is there is a place for the sort of home prestigious kind of students who are going to the universities in China. Then there is a place for those who are in a joint campus like Nottingham Ningbo. And then there's a place for those who are on TNE. And there's a place for those who are coming back from overseas. And I think understanding what that looks like will take us a little while. The British Council, for example, ran their very first employability event in December 2024 in China. They've never done it before. And I thought, okay, that's a good sign. So they're going to learn from that and see, well, if that's what we've got to do, then we are going to try and do that again. And they bring in a number of universities, a number of employers, and a number of alumni, and they're beginning to build out a model of what that could look like. So I think they recognize it.
There aren't any other questions. I wonder if I could sneak in one before. Oh, sorry, Jim, you go.
Yeah.
I think the partnership model is absolutely fantastic. The 2 years actually where they are and then bringing them over to the UK for that final year. But during that 2 years, you are actually prepping them students to be prepared to actually learn in the UK. What I want to know is, what are we doing to prep the students that aren't on a partnership, that are just coming and applying firsthand and coming to the UK? That I'd like to know. And then secondly, I'd like to know if you think that we're actually equipped to be able to give the students the experience and succession rates that they are after at university, because there's a lot of, you know, I mean, I deal with international students on a daily basis, and a lot of the time we don't see that success, and I think sometimes they are a little bit let down by what we can offer them. So I'd like to know what your opinion is, to think we are equipped or not.
So actually the data will tell you that our international students are happier than our UK students. Not necessarily at Keele, but across the sector. Also, attrition rates for international students is actually lower than European students. Now, the percentage is small, the numbers are small, but the percentage of EU students that quit their course is higher than the percentage of international students that quit their course. So, there is something that tells you that those students who self-select are already good students. They're coming here for a reason. One of the disadvantages of being a sort of a rural campus university is you don't have the canvas to play with. So, I mean, London was my previous university, so London is you don't have to do anything. London takes care of the students, to be honest. You just have to do a little. We have to do a lot more. I think at Keele we do a lot more, actually. But because we have always had really, really high standards, Keele has always had really, really high standards for home students. In its head, it thinks it needs to do that for overseas students as well. I don't know if that's realistic, but I think we need to understand that. But in general, our Keele international PGT students are happier than home PGT students, and they're happier than the rest of the sector from the last 2 ISPs that we've had. Small sample, but it gives you a sense of where they stand. Our undergraduate students have different behaviors by cohort. And I think we need to understand why that is. So we might be providing a generic standard of support, but actually some groups require more support and some don't require any support. They say, just leave me alone, I want to get on with it. And we've got to figure out which groups those are.
I suppose Antonius, just following Judy's question, just because they're happier, does that mean we're still, it's an open question, does that mean we're providing them with exactly what they need? They might be happier, but they might just have lower expectations than UK students.
Well, there is some of that. Depends. This is why cohortness comes down, and there is an element of country. But you have to think about it. The average salary in Pakistan, I think, is 250 GBP per month, and what we charge for a year's fee. We're dealing with a very, very small percentage of students who actually come to us. So in general, they are a different level. But it doesn't mean that we're providing exactly what they need. We need to understand that a lot more. Across the sector, we don't really have research that says this is what good looks like for international students. And if we are to address that proposition, we need to address that too. Yeah.
Annette, I'm just looking at you. No, nothing else.
Great.
Could I sneak in a quick question myself? Is that all right? I'll just wait for the mic so it can pick up. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. So I was interested in the slide in particular where there were clusters of partnership and the fact that our partnership, apart from China, was actually based on a lot of European contact, actually. A lot of countries from this side of the world, really. I'm wondering if we are anticipating longer term a shift in the dynamic, and in particular around the cultural and linguistic policies of a country such as China, where a hub develops and education and outputs in a language other than English will actually become quite a disruptor for us and our higher education policies. I'm just wondering, are we anticipating any shift in those kind of dynamics?
Well, Chris is a linguist.
I just slipped that one in, sorry.
No surprises. Okay, interesting, but I actually have an answer for this, believe it or not. Xiamen University, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Xiamen University. So remember I showed that Malaysia TNE is declining for the UK and has been declining for a long time. And one of the arguments I put forward is that, okay, Malaysian students are happy, they're choosing that, and their universities are getting better. Actually, Xiamen University became the first Chinese university to set up a campus in Malaysia. Xiamen University has a full campus in Malaysia. Some of you would know the population in Malaysia. 70% are Malay. In Xiamen University, 70% are Chinese. So they're already doing this. And so on campus, you have provision in English as well as Mandarin. And you have something new building there. I would not be surprised that that's the model that we need to focus on. When Trevor and I went out to Singapore, well, Trevor went out recently to Singapore, the Vice President of Public Health there, who Krisha has met, is supporting quite a few of those Southeast Asia countries on building their education provision in each of those countries, in their home languages, as well as in English. So I think that's going to happen. But if you were to look at India, I'll give you one statistic from India. The fastest growing internet in India is local language internet. 400 million users went online in India over the course of 5 or 6 years. 400 million. You just think about the scale of that. And the fastest growing piece of the internet is local language internet. And it wouldn't surprise me that that's a logical next step that we see from that. Right.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I think we'll wrap up then. And first of all, thank Antonius very, very much for a really stimulated evening and some great discussion. Also, many thanks indeed for the colleagues who have helped set up, as always, the organisation and running of the event. So Kiel Conferencing and Events, AVS team, thank you. Student ambassadors, thank you very much indeed for managing. And Annetta, of course, for managing the online group. And in particular to Steve Kilner, who, as always, does a really brilliant job in sort of managing the ILAS provision. Thank you, of course, to you too for making the time to come to this event. Just to let you know that this is the last of the ILAS Global Challenges lectures for this current programme. We will be setting up the next set of lectures coming forward, and we will obviously make the normal announcements and in particular on the ILAS website. So we're looking forward to some, again, stimulating conversations and debate coordinated through the ILAS Global Challenges. I think there has been a good level of discussion this evening, but if colleagues would like to hang around and enjoy perhaps a little bit more conversation around the topic and to pin Antonius down a little bit more in further discussion. We will be moving through to the University Common Room, which is just directly outside this room, to the back of the room, for some post-lecture refreshments. So I'll invite you all warmly to continue in there. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for coming. I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and a big round of applause for Antonius. Thank you very much.